Sudhir sir, good morning, sir.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Murali, good morning. Dr. Ishwarmurthy, good morning.
So good morning, sir. Good morning, sir.
Hello.
Sir, yes, sir.
Pravalika, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you start, Pravalika. Sir is waiting. Director sir is waiting. Please start.
Yes. The world is full of diamonds and gems, and we are having some of them here today to build this event. A hearty welcome to one and all. The first day of the online design sociology workshop, connecting the dots with design and technology. My name is Pravalika Saladi, a second year EC student from Tribulati DM Kannur. Before we move further, kindly instruct in the public chat. Without much waiting, we start the workshop with an old song by Miss Tanmay from second year ECE Tribulati DM Kannur.
A very good morning, everyone. Ya kundendu tushara dhavala ya shubhravastranvita ya veena varadanda manditakara ya shweta padmasana ya brahmachyuta Shankara Prabhitibihi Devaihi Sada Pujita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Nishesha Jadyapaha. Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful song Tanmay. I would like to call Dr. Krishna Naik sir as a welcome note.
Thank you, Pravalika. First of all, I would like to thank Honorable Director sir for accepting the invitation to inaugurate this session of today's workshop on connecting the dots with design and technology. So thank you very much, sir. First of all, I thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a very good workshop. Dr. Murali is organizing this kind of workshop since so long, and this is around 10th workshop he is organizing during this pandemic. I would like to invite each one of you. Around 48 students are already joined here, and still it's continuing. Around 75 students will be joining tentatively. Sir, I would like to bring to your notice, sir, and today's the agenda as well as the requirement of this particular workshop for which we are sitting here. That many various topics are going to be discussed here today and tomorrow, which are the product innovation by the Dr. Sudhir Vardarajan, and aeronautics for young minds by Prabhu Annadurai, and social networking for agriculture development by Rikin Gandhi, understanding the customer requirement by Gauri Shankar sir. Sir, I would like to bring to you the speakers. Speakers are very much eminent here, sir, and they will be spending us one hour every one hour, and they will be helping all our students current trends of these areas and these topics, and student will be going to benefit with these areas. Sir, I would like to bring to your notice of you as well as student. Today's environment here was very much pleasant, sir, and very picturesque. Student could have been enjoyed here physically if they could have been here, sir. Sir, I would like to request you to have the to provide us some sort of few words as an inaugural speech, sir. Hand over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krishna Naik.
Sir.
Good morning to one and all. Department of Sciences has planned yet another two-day online workshop for providing practical aspects to the students today. I congratulate the Adaba Department of Sciences, Dr. Murali and his team, and also the student volunteers for planning this workshop with the title Connecting the Dots with the Design and Technology. See, when dots are there, how many dots? When the number of dots increases, number of possible ways of connections also increase. But out of all these possible ways of connections, what are the right way of connecting in line with your design and technological considerations is a very, very important topic today. I'm very happy that the title chosen by the team is very good, and I welcome you all on behalf of IIIT-DM Kurnool and also on my own behalf, the two-day online sociology and design workshop. This is the first time IIIT-DM Kurnool has initiated a workshop with 4 honorable speakers. You all know that Indian Institute of Information Technology, Design and Manufacturing is one of the 5 centrally funded IIITs, and out of which one of the youngest IIIT-DM out in India. In fact, our institute is a unique institute as it offers design and manufacturing oriented curriculum to enable students to get the essence of industrial aspects in the presence of learning. I welcome all the eminent speakers. Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan, of course, he has visited many times to IIIT-DM Kurnool, and Mr. Prabhu Annadurai, Mr. Rikin Gandhi, and Mr. Gauri Shankar. I thank you all for accepting our request to deliver talks as part of this workshop.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your pleasant words.
I hope that all our students get inspired and enlightened from all of you, and definitely they are going to lead the future global technical world in the near future. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for your few words and blessing us and all the student community as well as the speakers. I request all the speakers to take over. Before that, I request Pravalika, can you introduce speaker, Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan?
So, yes, sir. Like Uttam will be handling the session from here, sir.
Good morning, everyone. I am Uttam and I'll be your host for this session. I take immense pleasure in introducing our guest of honor, Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan. Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan, sir, is presently the Dean of Design, Innovation and Incubation at a fellow institute, IIIT-DM Kanchipuram. He received his BE in Mechanical Engineering from Osmania University, his MTech in Industrial Management and PhD in Systems Engineering from IIT Madras. He is also the founding director of Made It Innovation Foundation, a design-driven technology business incubator, and the president of Institute Council. Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan is also a member of CII Southern Region Steering Committee on Manufacturing and Digital Excellence and the chairman of Technical Committee of Government of Tamil Nadu EDII IDC Innovation Watcher Program. He is the author of a book entitled Managing Nothing, a narrative inquiry into innovation and leadership in the IT industry, where he draws attention to the importance of everyday micro interactions in dealing with paradoxical issues relating to innovation. He has been associated with IIIT-DM Kanchipuram since 2015 and is involved shaping the interdisciplinary design and entrepreneurship curriculum and the incubation and innovation ecosystem. With special excitement, I am honored to welcome Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan, sir, to our workshop, Connecting Dots with Design and Technology. Sir, would you like to see the presentations done by students now or later?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me for this workshop. In fact, the title is very close to what I've been doing over the years. So, and also a lot of people at Kurnool I've been interacting with fellow colleagues over a period of time. So I'm very happy to be here to share some thoughts on this particular topic. And as we discussed yesterday, maybe we can start off with the student presentations, then I'll go into the discussions from there. That will be fine.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Our first presentation for the day is on startup awareness among IIITians, which will be done by Adarsh Srivatsava and his group.
Good morning, everyone. I am Adarsh Srivatsava doing BTech from IIIT Kurnool. Today, I got the opportunity to present my project in front of you all, and I'm grateful for that. So my project was about checking the awareness of startup among IIIT students and trying to pull out some helpful insights. So let me introduce my group members to you. They are Kushwant, Tanmay, Pravalika, Joseph, and myself. So now what we did was we circulated some carefully curated Google Forms across all the students of our college as well as other triple ITs. And amazingly, we were able to cover almost all the triple ITs, so our data is quite diverse. Now, firstly, let's see what were the general questions. So according to you, which of the following aspects are important in a startup? Okay, so for this, it's interesting to know that according to the replies, though from technical background, majority of students considers marketing to be an important aspect of a startup. Also, after artificial intelligence, the second most sought field for startup among students is agriculture. Students on an average prefers competitive co-founder than a friends or relative, which was also amazing. Then we tried to separate triple IT and triple IT DM data to see if there are any differences. So what we got was that on an average, triple IT DM students are slightly more familiar with startups than triple IT students. Whereas all the students are likely to work for a startup over a well-established company, which is a good sign for colleges like triple IT and triple IT DMs, which have a major emphasis on design and manufacturing. Then triple ITs have more students having startup ideas when compared to triple IT DMs. Now, coming to the next graphs, students in triple IT DM are much more interested in startups than those of triple ITs with a majority of factor. Then we also asked students to list down startups of their colleges, and that is the list we got. So there are a majority of startups, and these are just the startups which are known by the college students. There are still more of them which we were not able to cover, but these are the ones we got. Then after that, what we thought was that we tried to do some interview with people running startup to know the concept even well. So we did a total of 3 people's interview, and out of this, for this presentation, we have picked Miss Archana Rangrajana, who is a co-founder of Cashflow. So what we asked her was, like, tell us about your startup journey. Where do you got the idea, inspiration, starting point, and what currently is the status? How to get a startup idea and how to find the gap in the market. Should I join a startup at the beginning or gather a bit of experience in an established company before joining? And how do you manage the finances for your startup? Now, all these questions were not put up by us, but by the students who filled the Google Forms. And we just picked some best of them. So I'll just present the video.
Hi, I'm Archana Rangarajan and I'm the co-founder of agri-fintech startup Cashflow. I'm a chartered accountant and I've worked with Deloitte and Ernst & Young in mergers till I decided to start up on my own. What has always interested me is the rural economy, which is Bharat, and what drives Bharat is the farmer who has never had an economic identity. We see millions of tons of agricultural produce move from our villages on a daily basis with no clear trail, as it all happens offline. And with no trail, all these sellers are excluded from formal financial services. They cannot access credit. And this is exactly what we decided to change with Cashflow. Cashflow completely changes the way how buyers and sellers meet, interact, and transact with each other. It digitizes the procurement process right from the farmer's doorstep to where it is sold. And what is important to understand here is that to be able to start up, you need to find a problem that personally moves you. Founders' passion, along with execution skills, together will drive success. Look at inefficiencies in your daily life and how they're all being solved by different startups. Make a list of all the startups that are changing your life. It could be Urban Clap, it could be Swiggy, it could be HouseJoy, it could be Uber. And look at your local Kirana store, your local hospital, and anybody in your neighborhood, any store in your neighborhood. You look at the electrician that comes home, and see what their biggest problem is. Look at your school, your teacher, and the environment around you. You need to keep an open mind to see what are the problems that people around you are facing, including yourself. And anyone can build a product, but finding the market and building a product for that market is absolutely important, and that is what will differentiate you. If you haven't found the best problem to work on, I would say work in a startup. Find a startup where the founder is passionate and has exceptional ability to make things happen. The startup is always only as good as the founder. Take a core role in a startup and you'll start to think like an entrepreneur, and eventually you will be one. Thank you.
So from this video, we were able to get a lot of knowledge, and I hope students will find this very helpful. Thanks a lot. If there are any questions or queries, you could put that in the public chat. Thank you.
Dr. Sudhir sir, would you like to add something?
Yeah. So this is, I think, a very good piece of work done by the students to understand the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the IIIT context. And yes, IIIT DM institutions have a very specific mandate to promote student-led innovation, and it is integral to these institutions. So definitely you will see a slightly different focus in these institutions compared to the IIITs. But the points which are made by the one of the founders, Archana, I think, is extremely valid, which is what some of the things that I'm going to discuss subsequently as well. Ideas can come from anywhere, and from anyone. But the point of how do you translate them into a product and then take it to a market is a fairly long journey. And if students want to really get into this space, there is a certain degree of commitment and ownership which needs to come in. And that requires some level of preparation, mental preparation, and also understanding the local context, paying attention to the local context. These are all very, very important aspects. And this very much is dependent on appreciation of what is sociology. So I think it's a good summary to start with. But the survey could have been a little more structured because some of the data also, there are certain, like for example, somebody has mentioned Covidya is a startup. Covidya is not a startup. It's a program for design and innovation, which is a sandbox program. It is not a startup company. So some of the data and other things you can do a recheck, so which can strengthen the arguments in the survey. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable feedback. It really means a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Adarsh. So next, I would like to call Uttam and his group, and their topic is medieval design.
Good morning. I am Uttam and the presenter is Giridhar, and we are here to briefly show you and tell about our project on medieval India. Our team members are Giridhar, Venkatesh, Jagdish, Nikhil, Shashank, and Kaushik. Let's get started. The world is constantly evolving, from stones and sticks to concrete and missiles. The world saw many changes from the beginning. Our project lays emphasis on the medieval times. Most of the medieval Indian information is still unknown or unrecorded. One's past must be studied to become better, to evolve. So, to become a better country, our country needs to know its past. The history of India is like a huge ocean, but we know a very little about it. Our aim for this project is to recover and pass some of the history to analyze it for future use. Medieval India. Since ancient times, Indian society was being very unique. From the times when people communicated with mere words to the times when palm leaves and copper inscriptions were used, India has seen changes through till date. During the medieval days, India was ruled by local rulers and many foreign rulers as well. New cultures were seen, many new constructions came up and old were destroyed. People started leading a new way of life. India became a land of several religions and cultures. Many people belonging to several religions settled in India during this time. Many cultural exchanges, collaborations took place during this time. Thus, India became a paradise for everyone. India was considered to be a golden bird, full of life and prosperity. The lands here were fertile, and several rivers flow from place to place. All kingdoms around the world were just trying to get trade connections with India. Many started expeditions to find the route to India. Medieval India was rich in knowledge of maths, science, medicine, astronomy, religion, secularism, and many other fields of art. Several kingdoms rose to power, while several went down. It is a very vast topic and interesting topic to discuss, but it would not be possible to speak of every kingdom right now. So we decided to do on the case study on the mighty Kakatiyas. The Kakatiyas. The mighty Kakatiyas once ruled most of the Deccan region of India. They were known for the wonderful construction and the way they controlled the growth of economy and culture in a very balanced way. The city planning of Kakatiyas leaves the historians amazed till date. To show this, we decided to show you the Kakatiyan fort, which is known as Warangal Fort. It is now located in the modern day Warangal. This is the Warangal Fort. Actually, the Kakatiyas were initially the feudatories of the Chalukyan kings of Kalyana. They were ruling over a very small territory near Warangal under the leadership of Prataparudra, and later under Ganapati Deva. Kakatiyas expanded their territory very significantly. The legendary Kohinoor diamond was a part of the king's jewelry before it was taken by the invaders. Many dream qualities which we expect from the society in the modern day were already seen during the reign of Kakatiyas, which were like women empowerment, equality, and justice. Also, the crime rates were very less because most of the people were employed. Also, the Kakatiyas used to dominate the trade along the east coast. Zinc, copper, camphor, musk, silk, precious stones, pearls, beads, turmeric, onions, ginger, roots, and yarn were some of the materials which were traded. Most of the Kakatiyan arts evolved from the Chalukyan arts, where there were almost no defects of art's work. King Rudradeva note Nitisara in Sanskrit, and even Tikkana's literary contribution include Vijayasenamu, Kavya and Andhra Mahabhagavatamu. The next and the most interesting part about the Kakatiyas were the way of their architecture. For showing their architecture, we'll take you to another place. This is called the Ramappa temple. This is the Ramappa temple. In terms of architecture, Kakatiyas followed their former masters, the Chalukyas. But this was just in form. They managed to create a very distinctive feature of their own by bringing more indigenous form of art, such as paintings, which are known as Cherial paintings. The artisans normally used granite, basalt, sandstone, lime, and bricks. And many sculptures were made from lime and bricks. If you observe properly, any construction is given the name of their ruler or his representative. But the worker and architects were never given any importance or representation. But this case just waves all the history. The Ramappa temple was named after its architect Ramappa. Just look at its magnificent carvings, which survive even till date without any damage. Indeed, it is an architectural marvel. Without any further, let's get into the conclusion. What is a report without any conclusion? As I mentioned earlier, history of a country is very interesting to read, but it is not about just knowing our history. What matters the most is about what we learn from it. We came with the following analysis which could be very useful while ruling our country. The kingdoms of India gradually decreased in the course of time. Due to the presence of more kingdoms, there would be more regional differences and more generalization would be required. And secondly, the country's GDP was very stable and constant until India was invaded by foreign rulers. This brought a lot of cultural exchange and knowledge of many events and aspects around the globe to our country, but on the other hand, it reduced the country's share in the world market. The major problem with the downfall of trades and position of India in the market was because of the absence of unity. There were several leaders who understood this and tried to unify our country several times, but due to some reason or the other, whenever there is a break or dispute, India gets into a loss. The end of Gupta dynasty saw the loss in people's unity, breaking the country into several parts, making India vulnerable for invasion. And again, after a few centuries, the Marathas and Mughals were against each other when European powers came to dominate Indian subcontinent. What we feel is the loss of power of Gupta dynasty, the betrayal of Rana Silhadi to Rana Sangha, the discovery of sea route to India by Vasco da Gama were some of the major events in the medieval times which influenced India and shaped it into what it is now. Finally, we would like to conclude our presentation by saying, as long as our country stays united, we can hope to find a better future. Thank you.
Dr. Siddheshwar, would you like to add something?
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of points. The first one is Kakatiya and Ramappa temple. I think it reminded me. I had visited both NIT Warangal as well as the Ramappa temple while I was doing a study for NIT Warangal way back in 2000. The point of studying history, especially from a product design point of view, is to also understand where these what so-called values come from, right? So especially when you're trying to build any product for a particular society, a deep understanding of that society is critical. And that understanding cannot come by just doing a survey. It only comes by actually participating, immersing in that particular context. And when you immerse in that context, many of these questions start coming up about why people behave in certain ways in certain societies. Now, those things have a much deeper influence, because what we as society is a continuous evolution happening through interactions between various people over a period of time. So what we exhibit as behaviors in some way, they have these roots in different things which have emerged over a period of time. So that deep understanding, if you want to gain, you have to go back into the history. That's why studying history as part of design is very important. That is one aspect. Second is, many times, yeah, we would have all studied in school about history. But if you ask how much of history do I know, it will all be, again, many of us won't remember. Because we would have studied history more like from an exam point of view, and it will stay in the memory for a short time and go away. But really, if you want to get a hand of history, you should dig into your own history, right? Where you are coming from or where you are currently. Like, for example, you could have started off with looking at what is unique about Kurnool. You're studying in an institute which is IIIT Kurnool. What is unique about Kurnool? Right? How did this place evolve into this kind of thing? Who are the people who have influenced the various kind of things that happen here? And what kind of companies are emerging here? So if you start digging like that, you will have a lot more meaning for studying history. That is one. Second is, if you look at your own personal history of where you came from, where your parents came from. So like that, you dig a little more, you will start getting a deeper sense of who you are and what you are. And that plays a really important role in terms of really understanding and deciding what you want to do, where you want to go. Now, I'll give you a simple example. Like, I don't know why I ended up in IIIT Kanchipuram, but if I look back, there are a few patterns which have possibly triggered this, right? But one of the things was, when I finished writing my book, I was on a sabbatical, and before I had to rejoin the company, I also parallelly was trying to understand something about my roots. And my father came from Kanchipuram, so I somehow got hold of some old documents, land documents relating to that, and then I started doing a little bit of research on that. Then, like that, I went on tracing, and finally I traced up to almost 8 generations. And when I started looking at that, I also found a lot of relevant literature on the role of British, the role of locals, and all that during that period. It is almost like starting from the Carnatic Wars, some 1750s onwards. What all happened in this, and in the process I started reading a lot of literature related to this particular region, and that is where I started getting a different perspective about how British rule actually came about. While we all are used to a certain perspective, because what we get from our textbooks is one version of history, but there are also different ways of looking at history. And so when you look at that, the transition of a British from a trader to an administrator, how did it happen? And did it happen only because British actually, did they come with an intent to rule the country? Or the transition was an accidental thing which emerged out of certain interactions which happened in this particular place. Those kind of perspectives start coming out, and when you start getting that kind of appreciation, then your view towards things starts changing. You may not look at things with a certain bias. You may start taking a more balanced view of things, and that is the real value of exploring history. So you should make that attempt. You should start looking at your own context, where you are or where you came from. That will give you a much more balanced view of certain things. That is second aspect. Third is, from a technology point of view, today a lot more is happening in terms of reviving history or making history more accessible and things like that, which is where people call it as digital heritage. So, like for example, the same Ramappa temple, suppose I am visiting a temple, what do I do there? One is, yeah, there are certain boards people can see and know about the place. But there are different people who will be visiting that particular artifact for different purpose. Somebody may come there with a religious intent. Somebody may come there with purely an architectural intent. Somebody may come there as an engineer looking at some other marvels, right? So can they create a customized viewpoint about how this building was constructed or the choice of materials and other things? So people are beginning to use something like augmented reality, which can give very customized view of that heritage. So there's a lot of effort going into building such technological aids, which not only preserve the history, but also enrich the user experience of a person visiting that place, right? So these are the kinds of things that one can really start exploring around these. Since you have taken this topic, you can possibly look at these kind of extensions to this one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Uttam. Next, we have Ritika.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ritvika. I am pursuing BTech second year in the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering in IIIT DM Kurnool. We are a group of 7 members: Bhuvan, Tejashwini, Shravani, Basanti, Padmaja, Saubhagya, and myself. Demography. Demography is a study of human populations, their size, composition, and distribution across space. Demography related to our college is the statistical study of students, composition of various groups, expansion of studies, and enhancement of career of student community. The main idea of our project is to know more about the statistical data of our institute. As our institute is newly started, our project deals with the complete overview of our institute, total number of students, incoming strength from various states, etc. This can help the upcoming students to know more about our institute. The Indian government started IIITs with an aim to start some more premier institutes parallel with IITs and NITs to produce able engineers, initially focused on information technology and communication studies. 5 IIITs established, funded and managed by Ministry of Human Resource Development. The rest are set up on public-private partnership. Later, government thought to add some more institutes in design and manufacturing segment. 3 IIIT DMs started, one in Kanchipuram, one in Jabalpur, and the other in Kurnool. IIIT DM Kurnool was started as a part of government obligation under Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act 2014. Indian Institute of Information Act 2017 granted the INI status to Kurnool Institute. We feel proud to join in IIIT DM Kurnool with specialization in design and manufacturing, and there is a bounded responsibility to become specialized engineers in design and manufacturing segment. IIIT DM Kurnool launched its academic program with the support of its mentor institute, IIIT DM Kanchipuram, Tamil Nadu, on August 2015 from the Kanchipuram campus and shifted in 2018 with minimal facilities to Kurnool. IIIT DM Kurnool was established in the year 2015 with only 2 streams in BTech program funded by MHRD, Government of India. Mechanical engineering started in the year 2016. Further, PhD started in the year 2019 and MTech started in the year 2020. One more stream, artificial intelligence, going to be started from this academic year. Students' information. total number of students. From this graph, we can observe the rising trend of admissions year by year. This graph shows branch-wise student strength analysis. Student analysis based on gender. From this graph, we can observe great imbalance between male and female students. Due to lack of insufficient infrastructure, the institute unable to accommodate supernumerary seats for female students created by MHRD to improve gender balance and encourage female students. We may hope the addition of infrastructure year by year allows the institute for admission into supernumerary seats for female students as per the aspirations of MHRD to encourage female students for higher studies. Students data based on state. These graphs show state-wise student admissions. From these graphs, we can observe variation of preference by students of different states year by year. This improves students to understand the culture of other states. Student intake and cutoff data. As our institute is still developing, intake of students is low in starting years and is gradually rising. From this student intake graph, we can observe there is a great increase in the student intake when compared from 2016 to 2019. As number of students are increasing and institute is moving forward in academics, the cutoff ranks for upcoming branches are also improving. Recognition of institute is also improving among the people. Placements. This graph shows placement data of 2016 to 2020 batch. Total strength of 2016 to 20 is 69. In that, 54 members are registered, 30 members are participated, and 20 members got placed. Other students opted for higher studies. So the total placement percentage is 66.6%. This graph represents sector-wise distribution of a number of students placed. To conclude, great design takes time. As learning is a continuous activity, in the same way, development of an institute is also a continuous process, and there will be no end or saturation. It goes on changing with changes in development of technology. Studying in an under construction college itself is a big deal for students. There's sufficient laboratories, lack of resources, everything makes an impact on students' career. Triple-IT DM Kurnool is one among them. Started in 2015 and in initial stages of development. From all graphs above, especially from intake graph, we can say that there is a great improvement in the strength of students year by year. This increase happens only when sufficient facilities are provided, like accommodation of students, etc. This signs the development of Triple-IT DM Kurnool. These all happens under the guidance of DVLN Sobayajan Sir, Director of our institute, in collaboration with faculty members and students. The difference between good and bad architecture is the time you spent on it. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share about our project. Thank you.
Sir, would you like to speak anything about the presentation?
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick clarification. What is the percentage students from outside AP and Telangana?
Sir, Pravalika made me as a presenter. I will show the graphs. Sir, these are the graphs, sir.
Yeah, so percentage outside AP and Telangana, if you see, what is that?
3.09.
AP you have said is 56 point something. What is Telangana? Is 12. So it's close to 68 or 70%. Now this is a norm even in Triple-IT DM Kanchipuram. If you take, this is typically the ratio. So 70% is coming from other states. What you can also do here is you can go one level down and look at where are the students coming from, whether it is from tier 1 cities or tier 2 cities, right? That may give you some more insights in terms of are people coming from the tier 2 cities or the next level towns and others. That may be a useful insight to get, right? Second thing is gender. Can you go to the previous slide? I think the gender one. So this here, yeah, what is it, percentage or the what is that, absolute numbers, right?
Absolute numbers, number of
So
male
in
students
terms
and
of
female
percentage,
students.
how much is that? 19 out of 123. So it is
Yes, sir.
close to 15% or so, or 14%, something like that. Now,
Yes, sir.
this typically the 14% norm is there in most engineering colleges, except in IIITM Kanchipuram, we used to have close to 30%. Up to 2017, I think 2018, 2017, it was close to 30%. But after the expansion in IITs of the quota for women students, we have seen a shift happening there where it has slightly dropped less than 30%. Right? I think the 2019 batch or something, there was a slight shift which happened. But otherwise, if you take a general technology institution, this range seems to be okay, right? It obviously can improve, but it is not less in terms comparatively. So you can also do that comparison in terms of other institutions. Some of these numbers, how do they compare against other institutions that may of similar age or a similar type like other IIIT DMs. So that may give you a slightly different perspective on the data. Right. And the third point is when you are joining a new institution, yes, students will have a challenge because the institution also it is like that's where it is very similar to a startup scenario. So in a startup scenario, what happens? You are trying to build a product, but your technology is also not stable, right? So both the product and the process are evolving at the same time. So it is a very different challenge compared to a regular institute where the process and the technology is already laid out. Just enter as a raw material and somebody processes and throws me as a product, right? So what happens is actually one way you students can get frustrated saying I'm not getting what others are getting. But you are actually getting a different kind of experience to go to manage uncertainty and complexity a lot more. Now that is really a very valuable skill in the industry, right? Because you are in such an environment, you have to be resourceful in reaching out to different things to meet your requirement, and that in a way builds a lot of entrepreneurial qualities inside you if you actually utilize the environment proactively. So that is really in that way. And second thing is, you potentially all the new the first few batches going through this institutes are the brand builders of this institute. You are not just students. You should not look at yourself as students, brand builders. So that's a different quality that you can actually build as you are going through a process, especially in a new institute. That is how one should look at it. Then your way of participating in the institute, in spite of all the limitations, will be very different. But if you are in a mindset of saying, I am a student, I should get everything on a platter, and I'm not getting it, then you will continue with that frustration, and at the end of it, you will feel like I wasted my time here. I don't want to come here. I don't want to have anything associated with here. That kind of mindset starts developing, which is not desirable. But if you look at it as I also have a role to play in developing this institute, and there is a lot I can build in terms of my own qualities by reaching out to different people, and that entrepreneurial qualities will start nurturing inside you. Then you have a different kind of edge when you go out, and your appreciation of this institute will also be different. So if you can start looking at cultivating that kind of mindset, it will be a kind of real win-win for both yourself and the institute.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so thank you.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Now, I would like to invite Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan sir to discuss with us on the topic creative product design and innovation.
Sure. So I'll share my screen.
Yes, sir.
So can everybody see the screen, I hope?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, so good morning to all of you. So I'll next 30-40 minutes, I'll walk you through a few points relating to, I'll just put this on full screen mode so that, yeah. So in case somebody is not able to see or my voice is not clear, you can just inform me. I can stop and correct it. So I'm going to speak about, in relation to the title of the workshop, connecting the dots, but essentially connecting the dots between sociology, design, and innovation. So if I remember last time, I had given a talk on curiosity, design, and innovation. And yes, those three things are very critical, and sociology has a major role to play in all these activities, which is normally not well understood or appreciated. And that's the reason why IIITDM Kanchipuram introduced a course like this very early in the curriculum. Now in the revised curriculum, we have brought it even a little earlier, brought it to the second semester instead of the fourth semester. And the same has been shared with Karnool as well. Now, really, why we need to understand sociology when I'm talking about design and innovation? So there are two things. One is, of course, before I start, there is something called sociology of design and something called design sociology. Now we are mostly interested in sociology of design, which means what sociology has to offer to designers or innovators. Design sociology is mostly about what design has to offer to sociology. So today in sociology, people are also looking at what they can learn from design. So there is a two-way street which is getting established. But we will speak more about what sociology can offer design, and that's the focus for today's discussion. And in relation to whatever has been presented, the three topics, I think most of my discussion will be covering or reinforcing the three topics. So it looks like a good match between the topics which you have chosen and what I'm going to speak. So as I said, when you look at ideas can come from anyone and from anywhere. Like a simple example is when my son was 5 years old and he just got introduced to writing by ink pen, right? And so whenever he used to write, some spelling mistakes were coming. So one day while he was writing, he himself popped a question saying, what if the pen can beep when you make a spelling mistake? Right? So this casually, I was doing something else and he was talking, he was asking this question. Then I just stepped back and tried to understand. So what is happening here based on his own experience of doing an activity, an idea struck to him. Then I felt it was an interesting idea given today's advancements in technology. This may be possible. And then when I just Googled, I found that this happened around 2014 or so. And then I found that in 2013, a startup company in Germany had developed a product with very similar definition. And their product was priced around 600 euro. And they had also raised some $1 million funding to develop that product. The product was being positioned for medical professionals, especially doctors when they write prescription and all. How do you ensure that the prescriptions are written in a certain standard format or whatever? So there is a certain kind of potential application there. And so what it essentially triggered was, how can a child who is only 5 years come up with an idea? So then basically it is a point that ideas can come from anyone. And many of you would have seen this movie Ratatouille, right? In that there is this famous quote which is made that not everyone can cook, but great cooks can come from anywhere, right? Which is like a rat can also be a cook. But what then the second point is when we look at students, like when as part of our curriculum we encourage students to come up with ideas, look at problems and all that. So when we ask students, people do come up with these ideas like, how can I memorize the entire content in a textbook using brain-computer interface, right? Now these are interesting, definitely very interesting ideas to pursue. But what happens once the idea comes? What happens, and what is it, and where does this idea really come from? How does the idea really emerge, and what happens after the idea comes? So these two aspects need a lot more thought and understanding, right? Does idea just blindly pop up in somebody's mind, or there is something which happens before the idea actually pops up? So I will share some perspectives on that. And then the second side is what happens after the idea comes. So what we see is post idea coming, there is all of you will have experienced this. There is an increased energy flow inside a body. Definitely there is a kind of sense of energy we all feel when we come up with a new idea. So the idea triggers a kind of general energy increase in the body. But after a few immediate iterations, the ideas fizzle out, right? And when we closely observe, so like you take that brain-computer interface. So then I ask students, okay, if they come up with this idea, then I say, okay, why don't you do some more research on this? Why don't you explore how this can be implemented? Why don't you start looking at the physics behind it? So when you start asking these questions, then slowly people realize, no, I don't have adequate knowledge. I don't know the context well. I don't know the application well. Like this, many things start coming. And after that, they realize, and somebody gave me a feedback, this won't work. Once these things start coming, the number of hurdles, then people basically withdraw. So if you look at it closely, it is like, I got an idea, but the connections around that idea are not there. And unless somebody builds those connections, it is not going to move forward. But building that connection requires energy, requires a lot of effort. So how do these connections, what are these connections? What kind of things happen? How do they take it forward? This, if you look at it, there are two sides to look. One is from a space point of view, which is you take any product, the relationship you need to understand between science, technology, product, and society. Or whether it is, when I say society, it includes the business, entrepreneurship, or the user, business, and all that. It is very important to understand these connections and where you are currently. So when you get an idea, where is it? Is the idea here at a product level? Is the idea here at a science and technology level? Is the idea here at a user level or a business level? Where is it? And therefore, what does it mean? If suppose I get an idea which is here, I need to make this journey from here to this product and product to society to make it successful. Suppose I get an idea here, to realize this, I will have to traverse this whole path, or I have to traverse this path, right? So these things require time, require other connections. Without these connections, I cannot convert something into a useful value. See, at the end of the day, when you say innovation, it has to convert to commercial value, right? Commercial value will not come if there is no product really being created there. And this product will not happen if it is not based on sound principles of physics. So what happens today in an engineering college, typically we teach this portion, that is science-driven engineering, which means based on known principles of physics, how do you build technologies or how do you build solutions that are scalable, that are efficient, and that are accurate, right? But how do they actually translate into something useful to the user or the society where somebody wants to pay for it? That cannot be done if you don't understand these questions of why and what. Knowing how alone is not enough, right? So I have to traverse this whole journey. At the same time, when you look from a designer's point of view, they are very much concerned about this question first, right? They keep asking this question a lot more before you start coming into this side. So these dependencies are very important. And if when I get an idea, what happens most often, the idea will be a dot here or a dot here. I need to build these other dots and the connections for this to become a meaningful endeavor. And that requires observation, participation, bringing other people into picture, many things. And that is where things start breaking down. On the other hand, look from a time point of view. When you get an idea, the product development process is something, a series of things, like an idea translating into a technology or a product, and then it becomes a real full product, mature product. Like this, the life cycle goes on. But there are several bottlenecks or several areas where things can break down. In this stage, especially in the early stages, we call it as the fuzzy front end. Because here not everything is very clear and cut. So if you are an engineer, this phase is extremely difficult for engineers, because engineers want definitions to be given in fairly accurate manner of what has to be done. This why and what have to be precisely stated for an engineer to do how. If why and what are not clear, this how cannot be done. So who is going to prepare this why and what? How is it to be done? This requires an ability to deal with ambiguity, ability to deal with complexity, ability to deal with uncertainty. Only by assimilating all this that you can start refining this to a level where you can start translating into a technology or a product. But even then, the next phase comes, there are this kind of what is called valleys of death. This is a term which will typically be used in innovation called valley of death. Now, I'm just showing you one valley of death, but there are multiple valleys of death possible. So what is this valley of death? There is an initial euphoria which drives the product development activity. But after some time, several things happen. You may not find your customer, you may not find the appropriate material, you may not find the appropriate technology starts misbehaving, whatever it is. So things start going down. And through this process, again, sometimes only few people start recovering out of this and coming through. It is not a linear process that I build this, next I build this, next I build this, next I build this. It doesn't happen like that. There will be cases where things will go down like this, and still you need to find a way to recover. So only those people who companies which are trying to go through this process, they may have a chance to really get the value out of it. Why does this happen? Again, it goes back to this network. So what happens if there is a steady network, you can go on building it, right? And more nodes are getting added and nothing is disturbed, it happens. But after some time, you realize some choices which you have made in that product are not relevant. So some nodes in the network have to be removed. When you remove nodes of the network's fitness goes down. So you have to figure out, bring new nodes into the network. Like simple thing, the team itself may get dismantled. The people who have joined initially, somebody may say, no, this is not going anywhere. I am not seeing, it is taking far too much time. I don't have enough resources. I want to go and take a better job. Somebody leaves, right? So an important guy in your team has left. Then you have to find an alternative. Similarly, something else has changed in your product, or the purpose for which you built your product, you realize that purpose is no longer valid. Then you have to repurpose it. Like in COVID times, you have seen a lot of companies repurposing their business, pivoting their business towards new requirements. So that when you do, again, you have to redo your product. So these kind of situations will keep emerging. And this is also another reason why a lot of these ideas break down at different points in time. So it is very important to understand. So what is behind this, right? And in a academic environment, especially as a student, when you are beginning to talk about entrepreneurship, you will face a lot more conflicting situations, paradoxical situations, right? I have written a recent paper. This just a quick summary out of that is the everyday interactions that happen between students, with faculty and all. There could be different kinds of messages which keep coming, which reinforce certain ideas or basically create that conflict in your mind of whether really you need to go in this direction or you need to withdraw, right? And those everyday conversations also can create a lot of disruptions in the way you want to move forward, right? And we ask students to draw perceptions about what they are going through. So these are some examples, like for somebody says, one side people are saying please think, another side people are saying don't think, one side people are saying get back here, another side people are saying no, come back, right? On other side people are saying no, you can't think. On the other side people are saying you are stupid, right? This kind of conflicts do come up, and students' ability to deal with this kind of opposite statements is very limited, but that ability to deal with conflict is another thing which is very extremely important. Sorry. And as I told, product development process, it's a very ambiguous situation, that fuzzy front end. You may start with an initial idea saying this is what it is, but as you keep developing it, the idea starts changing into something else, and because of which your anxieties can go through different stages. And if you are not able to survive and take this journey, then this connecting the dots will not be happening. So these are some of the quick perspectives on the various factors which play out a role in terms of why the ideas don't translate, or most ideas don't succeed, right? But really, so when you closely look at it, product innovation needs more than a process. Everybody says process, process, process. But if you go back to, say, for example, Stanford says they have got a process of design thinking, right? Which is essentially some 6 steps that everybody needs to follow. You should empathize with the customer, you should create ideas, you should prototype and something like that. And then say people follow this process, they will all produce creative products. What they don't tell is who is doing that, right? Does anybody following the process produce the same output? It is not a mechanized process like a machine. If I have built a machine, that machine, irrespective of who the operator is, produces something. That is fine. But innovation has not come down to that level of a machine. The process is only a series of steps or a guidance on how something has to be explored. But who explores, how they explore is also equally important, if not very important, when it comes to innovation. So these other aspects, passion, patience, persistence, purpose, these have a major role to play. When you want to go from this traverse this entire journey from conceptualization of a product to realizing and marketing and creating value, right? This is what is going to be the fuzzy front end. This phase is like this. It is not a linear phase. A lot of uncertainties are there before it becomes something streamlined. Engineering typically comes after this. So when it comes to detailed design, manufacturing, that is where engineering comes in. This is the space where what you call design thinking and other things are more dominant. Management thinking, design thinking, those are the qualities which are also required for you to deal with situations which are in the early stage. And now the question is, when we talk about passion, patience and all this, where do these come from? Process, okay, somebody can tell this is the step-by-step process you follow. Where will this passion, patience, persistence, purpose and all come from? So when we talk about innovation, it is connecting the dots across all these levels, right? and with different actors over time, different stakeholders, whether it is people or institutions or any other objects, those connections need to emerge over a period of time. So if you take a typical real world problem where some real economic value is associated, if you solve that problem, some economic value can be created. It has to relate to a design concept which has to make sense, which should be based on some deep user insight, which has to be driven by some technology solutions, which have to be linked to some basic science related properties. These connections are very important, right? When I'm building a product, I should start seeing where am I in this hierarchy. My idea, does it have only this and this? What about this? What about this? Is there anything underlying this? These connections I should be constantly willing to explore. It is only by doing this that you start developing a real product and something which can go to the market and make a difference. So understanding sociology is important because of two things here. One is sociology, especially ethnography, teaches you how to observe, how to listen, and discover more about the problem and its context. So some of the presentations you people have made, some of the teams have made, essentially links to this. When I get an idea, I should ask the question, where does that idea fit in? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Does it have an element here? Does it have an element here? And this understanding the problem space, understanding the solution space, distinction between these two is very important. So first step is to go much more deeper into the problem space. Why is this problem happening? Why do you think people need to, like for example, I gave you this a pen that beeps when you make a spelling mistake. That's an idea, but what does it have? It says there is a kind of solution which is required for a problem which is spelling mistake. But I should start probing, what is this spelling mistake? Why does it happen? And is it necessary? Is it not necessary for the student to make that spelling mistake? Should I eliminate that idea of making a spelling mistake very early by giving him a pen that corrects, which means he may never learn the spelling? Because he starts using the technology more, he may never learn that spelling. So is that the right thing to do? These are the kinds of questions we should be asking here. And that is where ethnography and immersion becomes very important. Sociology is one of the major advantages of understanding sociology is there is this entire field called anthropology. Anthropology is actually study of different people and cultures. Over a period of time, they have developed certain methods to how to observe cultures, how to observe people without disturbing them. Like for example, all of us know that if you see the African this thing, right, in National Geographic, you would have seen lions, people recording lions and all that. How do they do that? They just don't go put a camera there and then start shooting the lion. They have to spend time there, build trust with the lion, and when the lions behave in a normal fashion, ignoring the presence of the human, that is where they start recording. Or they will put a hidden camera, which today to be more safe, it is possible, so they can put something there where the lions in their natural habitat, how they are behaving is what is being recorded. But in human societies, you cannot do that. You cannot put a hidden camera inside a house and say, I'll record what you're doing, right? So what ethnographers essentially do is they go and become part of a system. They become to observe what is happening in that system without disturbing the system. And then make their observations and record what is happening. So I'll give you one example here of one professor. There's a book, some of you, if you're interested, you can read. Just like today, when we ask about what is the state of undergraduate education and all, if you ask faculty, general perceptions will be, oh, in our days, students were like this, they were much more disciplined, they were this thing, they did not have access to mobile and all that, they were much more motivated. But today students are like this. This is a general statement many of you would have heard at home as well as in colleges. So the same thing exists in US also. They are not very different. So this particular professor, what she did was, instead of carrying this perception, she felt maybe there is something else that today's generation is actually going through, which we don't understand. Now, how do I understand that? I cannot ask somebody, please tell me what you're going through. They will tell something. So, or I cannot do a Google form survey and start getting some readings out of that. They will all be very limited. See, when you run a survey, just you put yourself in the shoe of the survey responder or giver. When I open a screen, like suppose faculty feedback form, I will just fill up something and throw. How much of thought is gone into filling that survey? Nobody can control that, right? Whether I filled the survey in 2 seconds or whether I filled the survey in 20 minutes, you really can't make much out of it, right? So what you get is not really a very useful information. Yes, if there is some very general pattern which is common cutting across a large group of people, I can make sense of that. But you will not get real insights into a session. So what this professor did was, she enrolled for an undergraduate program. She went through that same process of writing an entrance, getting selected, and joined an undergraduate program, spent 1 year doing coursework under that, along with the students, living along with them in their hostel, going to lunch along with them, and studying in the class and doing assignments along with them for 1 year. And many of the students were also a little confused why a slightly adult person is coming and doing undergraduate. But in US, there is a little difference. In US, that kind of barriers are a little lower because there you will find people coming back to college even after running a company and all that. So that way she was able to camouflage her interest. But after that, she reflected on what she observed and wrote a book. And there she says, it is not correct to assume that today's students are more confused or lack discipline and all that. Today's students are dealing with a lot more uncertainty than what we used to deal with. And in relation to that uncertainty, they are figuring out different ways to cope with that uncertainty, which is manifesting into certain types of behaviors, right? It is not that they don't have focus or clarity or things like that. They are trying to explore the world in their own way, trying to understand their interests, and in the process, they are also trying to find a way forward, right? So it is not that we cannot judge them as not good enough or not focused enough compared to a different generation. So these kind of viewpoints come only when you immerse in a particular situation. Like, go back to that interview by one of the founders. She was saying, go and look at your local context. That local context is very important. Today we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat and all that. COVID has actually created a situation where people have to take their local situations more seriously. Today, most generations, we start thinking that, okay, my job is to get educated here and then join some multinational company or get some abroad or something like that. What am I doing for the context around me? How can I even do something if I don't know anything about that context? How will I know anything about the context if I don't spend time to understand that context? That is what is very important. So this is really where sociology and ethnography have an important role to play. Second aspect is, you are identifying your area of interest. Like, all of us will have something. Like, for example, take the same thing, a student who said, I want to do brain computer interface for this one. This is an idea which has come at a point in time. Well, okay, I'm preparing for exam, I'm not able to remember, and suddenly I realized this idea stuck to me, so it came. But is that what really I want to do in my life? Is this what really I am capable of doing? Like for example, if this is an area, I am in mechanical engineering, can I do this? Do I have enough skill sets to do this? Or should I take some other courses to be able to do this? Do I have real passion in going after this type of topic? All these questions require a deeper understanding of the self, and not only self, the people around you, because no entrepreneurship is built by one person. You always need a group, at least a few people to work with you to do that. So where are these like-minded people? And why should they invest their time to build something like this unless they have a similar kind of interest and a passion to go forward? So identifying what you are, how you relate to others, this again is nothing but it calls for a better understanding of sociology. So unless this is there, most ideas don't go forward. And we see when we ask teams to form, students to form teams and other things in the courses, the idea is for you to get to know these dynamics, right? And many times after the team starts working, you will realize some people performing, some people not contributing, some people are doing free riders, right? All this happens, and these are all ways, situations one has to learn to deal with, because it is not straight away you will not find a collaborator who is best interest, and or your friend need not be your collaborator, right? He may be your very good friend, but he may not be interested in what you're doing. So if you take him as a part of the team, he may join, but later he will say, no, after some time I am interested in something else, right? So all these things require a different perspective towards how individuals and other people and the human relationships part. So I'll give you a couple of activities to do so that you get the message. So this particular slide, sorry, excuse me. So I've told you about the importance of immersion. So a couple of exercises to highlight that point. So I want you to look at this picture on the right side, right, and concentrate on these 3 dots here for 30 seconds. So just concentrate on the 3 dots and then close your eyes. Tell me what you see. If you see something, then let me know, or one of you can unmute and tell me if you see something. In this picture, in the center 3 dots, concentrate on the center 3 dots where my cursor is, and after 30 seconds just close your eyes. Something will emerge in your mind. If you see that, then you can unmute and tell me what it is.
Hello?
Yes?
I can see that face on the wall, like Jesus' face on the wall.
Yeah, right. So what you can, so many of you would also started seeing, it is essentially a negative image of Jesus Christ, right? So the idea is any problem, when you straight away look at it, it will not be visible. Only when you immerse in that problem, stay with it for some time, then the real issues will start becoming visible. So you need to have that persistence and patience to observe situations much more deeply. When somebody gets an idea, that idea itself is a starting point. If it is not going to be a product, you should treat it as a starting point, but start paying more attention to, okay, why am I talking about brain computing interface for memorizing, improving memory in teaching? What is the purpose of teaching? What is the purpose of learning? Is it just capturing that memory? What exactly is it? So I should go deeper into that. What exactly is learning? I should go deeper into that. then only I will start getting a different perspective towards what is learning, which may then start questioning whether really BCI is required or not, or something else is the problem, right? Similarly, I'll give you another thing, which is the power of immersion is also in creating or triggering creativity is also extremely valuable. So what happens is, I can give you a couple of examples here. One is, maybe you should do this activity. So you can just quickly do this. What is 3 divided by 6? All of us will say 0.5, right? Now, just to go back and ask, can it be anything else other than 0.5? Can it be 0.499999? Anyone thinks, can it be 49999? If so, how? I'll give you just 1 minute, try it out and tell me. At the outset, this looks like a ridiculous question, but there is an extremely interesting point of view coming from not from a 5-year-old. Recently, during COVID times, one of my students has been, he reported this. He was teaching some kindergarten students some basic maths of addition, multiplication and all. So one of the child came with this answer. And he didn't know how she arrived at this. Then we started looking at it closely. There is an interesting pattern that she is seeing which others are not seeing. For us, 0.5 is from memory. We are saying we have been used to tables. 6 5s are 30, 3 right? So from tables memory we know that, right? And basic things, straight away we come to one answer. But somebody, when they go deeper into the same thing, they are able to explore a different facet of the same thing, which leads them to play around with that information. And when you play with a certain set of information, novelty can emerge from that. This is a simple example of that. So if you have tried something, but let me just show you how it can be done. So you can see 6 into 0.5 plus 0 is also 3, which can also be rewritten as 6 into 0.4 plus 0.6 is also 3. Now you can see you can rewrite this as 6 into 0.4 plus 0.09 plus 0.06. That is also 3. So when you start doing that, you start getting this 0.99999 plus this 0.06, right? So you can actually get this kind of equation with a reminder. It doesn't say, he's only asking what is 3 divided by this. You have not asked what is the complete solution. But a playful exploration can lead to a different understanding of the concept of division and the limits of this whole thing. This is a very powerful way of understanding mathematics, right? This is a process of exploring. It is not just blindly accepting what the teacher is saying, 3 divided by 6 is equal to 0.5, and I just memorize that and go ahead. If I play around with these variables a little more, I can actually get a deeper insight into what is mathematics and what are numbers. I'll give you another example which I have personally experienced. So this happened when my son was about 7 years. He somehow got interested in recording calendars. So what he used to do, in any calendar he used to take on a chart, he used to write down the calendar, just replicate that calendar, January, February, March, April, like that. This he was continuously doing for about 3 to 6 months. We didn't know why he was doing it. All we had to do is buy him a calendar and some pens, and he will be busy with that. After a long period, he asked a question and we never paid attention to that whole process. We just bought some paper, charts and other things and forgot about it. One day when we were traveling in a car, That time he didn't have anything to do. So he popped a question saying, you tell me a date, I will tell you the day. Then we were surprised. So we gave one date. Then he told it is Friday. Then after some time we gave another date. He gave that day also, which was, then I checked the calendar. It seemed accurate. Then we changed 1 month. He told that answer, took some more time and told that answer. Then we changed 1 year. He managed to tell that. Then I changed it to another year, or it was a leap year. That time he made a mistake. Then I started asking him, how did he arrive at this? Then he told, do you know that 1st January and 31st December are always same days in a year? Now for me, I didn't know that. Now we all know calendars, and we have been with calendars for so many years. I didn't know that. I know that always, like everybody, if 1st January is a Monday this year, next year it will be a Tuesday. That we all know. But 1st January this year and 31st December this year are the same days. It is exactly same thing, but different way of looking at it. That pattern is a starting point, and he has figured out this pattern by repeatedly doing this. How did he do this? He is not just blindly replicating. Every time, and recently I did a research on that, I found that it is not just, he is not copying a calendar. He is taking a calendar and trying to improvise on that calendar in different ways. Like for example, we all know calendars typically start with Sunday. First column will be Sunday. So in some of his charts, he has changed first column to Monday. In some charts, he has changed first column to Wednesday, right? Similarly, he has not written one calendar regularly. In some places, he has taken January from 1 year, February from another year, March from another year. This kind of improvisations he has been doing constantly in those sheets, which is leading him to see patterns. Remember, he is not, nobody has told him to do this. Nobody has given him a gyan or education on what is a calendar, how it is structured, nothing. This is a self-driven initiative and an immersive process which is leading to see patterns. This potential exists in all of us. It is, we are not exploring these things. Under various logics, I have to do, I have that thing to do, I have to complete this exam. We are creating our own boundaries and not immersing in certain problem situations. It is only when you do this kind of deeper immersion that you will start seeing some really useful insights. And that insight is the one which will create that enough passion and energy to take it forward. And real conviction and the purpose, those things will start coming from that. That is why this immersive process is very important. This immersion can come from learning the principles of ethnography, which is part of sociology. So I'll give you another example. Yeah, all of you would have also heard of this Teflon, right? Teflon comes from this Tefal company. Their story is also on similar lines. So the guy was actually working in a R&D facility in one of the defense establishments in France, right? But as part of his own personal interest, he was looking at doing a fishing rod. For his fishing purpose, he wanted to build a fishing rod. And for that, he was experimenting with some materials. So somewhere while he was having difficulty in getting certain materials to work for that fishing rod, one of his friends has suggested that DuPont had come up with a new material, this PTFE, and why don't you use that as a coating for the fishing rod. So then he started experimenting with that. And one day his wife was very much concerned that this person was spending too much time either in the office or doing some personal research, and she was complaining that they were cooking at home, the food was getting burnt and nobody was there to check on the pans. So she asked him to go and buy a different saucepan. So he went to the market, he couldn't find the saucepan, he bought a frying pan. So when he brought the frying pan, the frying pan is not suited for this activity, and that is where this wife actually triggered this question saying, why is this sticking, and can we not use a non-stick thing for this one, for the frying pan? And this particular idea which he was exploring on the fishing rod, that material of PTFE, then he found that that can be applied to create a film on top of the frying pan. And for that he created a process. So by how to get the aluminum pores and especially to hold this particular coating, right? And once this innovation started coming, then they started building a technology around that, and that is how your non-stick frying pan started coming into play. And when non-stick frying patterns come into play, their market changed. Essentially, they created a totally new segment for in the home market. So that's how a complete new connections between multiple layers emerged. And Teflon today is one of the world leaders in this area. They have further significantly innovated in to come up with different products and all. But if you really look at it, the source of innovations and the people involvement. So it wouldn't have come if his wife had not participated and complained against what was happening, and he did not pay attention to the cooking process at home, right? While he was innovating with something else for some other purpose, the eventual application emerged in a different context because of somebody else playing a role there. So these kind of connections is what leads to finding out new patterns and new markets. And that is why the role of people and the kind of local appreciation of local context, these are extremely important. I am sorry, I'm not able to go into details of this case because already we are 11:05. I have another couple of slides to cover, and then maybe I'll take up more questions. So I'll skip this also. This is essentially the kind of journey that product development has to go through. It is not going to be a linear one. The network has to be developed. Network development requires you to work with different people and understand the underlying process of human interaction. So let me summarize quickly with saying engineers who elaborate a new technology as well as those who participate in design, development and diffusion are essentially sociologists, because they are constantly constructing hypotheses and forms of argument that pull different participants into a kind of sociological analysis. So when I'm building a product and creating a market, I am influencing different stakeholders and changing their perceptions or creating new meaning for a group of people to pursue a certain purpose, right? So therefore here, if you see, instead of understanding social, economic or technical in isolation, it is important to participate and understand how the nature of interactions and network positions of actors shape network formation. That is why history matters. Another important aspect is paying attention to the present moment and the way we talk. These become extremely crucial when we talk about design and innovation. What we have in our regular talk is what is called recursive representational talk, which is I talk about objects, like especially when we talk about English for communication, that is mostly a recursive or a representational talk. Rhetoric responsive talk is mostly related to how I relate to other people and objects, how I sense and respond to people and objects, which leads to new meaning creation and relationship development. This is a slightly different type of talk. I cannot go into too much detail, but this maybe has been part of discussed as part of your course. I'll skip some of that, or I've shared some of the videos on these sessions. If you have time, we can go through that. With that, I'll conclude with one last story. It is also tea time, so I'm putting this story primarily because this is an exercise I had given to some of our students recently. It is called complexity, TEA at the end. I had asked students to prepare a cup of tea because everybody is at home. And I told them you prepare at least 2 cups of tea and serve somebody at home, and then come back and let's discuss about product design. So this is what they did. Each of them produced some different either tea, coffee, or somebody had milk and various things. And some of them, of course, got me downloaded Instagram photographs from somewhere. That is okay, but majority actually participated in the exercise. But Uday did something which really defines what design is. What he did was, he didn't prepare tea, this particular picture. He prepared more like a dessert. So I asked him why he prepared dessert. Then he said, look, we had lunch at only 2:30 and you told us to prepare tea at 3 o'clock and 3:30 and join the class at 4. And I went into the kitchen, I found we didn't have enough milk at that time. So I had to either boil fresh milk, which will take some more time. On the other hand, we had just finished lunch at 2:30 and we normally have tea only at after 5 o'clock. So then it struck to me that since the amount of quantity of milk is not very high, at the same time we don't want to have tea at this point of time, I felt I should do something which is fitting with that context. So then I decided to do a dessert because it is something which can be done in smaller quantity and people can have it after lunch, and there is a gap for the regular tea time. So I created something like a milkshake, added some jam on top of it, things like that, to create a small dessert kind of thing and shared with people. Now this is an example of highly contextual response. So what he has done is, even though I had given an instruction, please prepare 2 cups of tea or any beverage, he looked at his own context. He said, okay, I had lunch only 2:30, so we will not be ready to have tea now. I don't have enough milk. I have only little milk left, right? And so I cannot prepare large quantity. So he prepared a dessert, and for dessert, he found that there is a cup which is of smaller size that can be used to actually fit with the context. So he packaged all of this and he then added a little jam or whatever. So this was a highly contextual solution that he came up with, instead of just following an instruction. Now that is an example of true design thinking. How contextual can you go and fit your solution? That's why, like even what the founder earlier was saying, pay attention to your context. What is unique in your context? That is where you start looking at it, and that is what will lead to real innovative solutions for the local context, which is the need of the hour, and which is what will lead to what is called Atmanirbhar Bharat and other things. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'm open for any questions now.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat box.
Okay. So if there are no questions, then maybe you can. Okay, there's some question coming up. What thought should be kept in mind while designing a product? I should get profit with my product, or my product should be useful to society. See, unless you are looking at social innovation, social innovation is where this social requirement becomes a dominant thing. You should look at something which is commercially viable. Even in social innovation, you may not generate a profit, but the business has to function, means you have to generate revenue, right? You may operate at cost level, but the business has to operate, so it has to generate revenue, right? You may not make a profit out of it, but fundamental thing is whatever you produce, somebody should be willing to pay for that, either directly or indirectly. If they are not willing to pay, or there is nobody is willing to create a commercial transaction out of that, then that business has no purpose. It cannot survive. As simple as that. Whether you make a profit or not, that's a choice that the company can always make, right? So I generate revenue. That revenue I can put back into building the product further, or I can give back to society in different ways. That is fine. But if your product is not creating value for the customer, and why will somebody pay? Unless he sees value in that, he will not pay for it, right? So that is how one should look at it. Next question is how design will affect emerging technologies. Design affecting emerging technologies is one thing. Emerging technologies also can affect design. See, design, what is design? Design essentially is that connection between, I showed you 3 layers, right? Between technology, product, and society. Design plays a major role in bridging the gap between the product and society, right? What is the real need in the society, and what is that really will address, create value for society? That is the question that design is primarily addressing. Then comes the next question, okay, if this is my concept, how do I realize it? What is the right choice in the technology which will help me realize it? That is where the technology. So if you have a technology which can meet that requirement, you can as well use that. So whether it is an emerging technology or an old technology, you can use that to meet that need. On the other hand, sometimes you may discover needs for which there is no technology. That can trigger search for a new technology. So this is a kind of a two-way process. Sometimes, okay, because okay, let's go back to the same thing. A pen that beeps when you make a mistake. Suppose 20 years back I make this statement, people will say it's not possible, right? Because there is nothing called, at least popular understanding of AI and other things was not there. AI technology started evolving in the 70s, but in the grassroots level, as a popular understanding, people may not be aware of what is AI and others. So people will say, no, that's not feasible. Pen is a mechanical device. How can it even recognize information? But advancements in sensors, advancement in machine vision, all that has made it possible for today to read something. So OCR recognition already came much earlier, but after that today, next recognition is possible because as your pen is moving, you can detect what is the next path of the pen. So therefore you can detect what is the likely alphabet which you may end up with, right? So that is level of technology emergence today makes it possible to build something like that. So in that sense, a need which is felt but cannot be realized can be realized today because there is a technology available. So technology can create options for fulfilling a need, but new needs can challenge existing technologies. So they will create new barriers, saying that, okay, no, I want something which like, for example, that BCI thing. If I touch like your Amir Khan does in that movie, this one, right? PK movie. He holds the other hands, then the entire memory language transfers to him. That's more like a hi-fi this thing at this stage, right? But with BCI, technically that is it can be attempted, right? Essentially, what you're doing, you have to suppose I take a textbook. Braille concept is what I can touch a textbook and convert that into some signals. So people are trying to build electronic devices which can look at the Braille and convert that into some signals which will tell you what alphabet and word is there. So if that is possible, then on top of that you add the BCI, you can convert to neural signals and then augment, trigger the hand movement or whatever to do what actions you want to be done. So, but that may require a lot more advancement in the way the neural information is fed into your brain. So this may create new challenges for technology advancement. So it's a kind of a bidirectional thing which goes on. Next question is, when people start to rely on products for everyday function, is that a good or bad? No, you just look at it is not relying on everyday function. You just step back and look at things around you. Is there anything around you which is not human made, which is not a product? We live in a world, all our artifacts are different types of products that we have created for our own purpose, right? Now, in some cases, we may overdo some things. Some cases, we things which are not required, which are destructive. That is why now today people talk about sustainable design. So you start understanding when you are creating a product, you understand its environmental impact, its user value, and then decide whether it's worthwhile for you to do this. That asking that question is very important. That's why understanding the problem context is very important. Do I really need to build a solution which will help people remember everything in a textbook? That's a question I need to ask. Then what is the purpose of what is learning? Is it just memorizing a textbook? So what if everybody remembers all the textbooks, then what? So those questions need to be asked. How to improve our creative skills? The first step to creative skills is immersion in a context. There is nothing like what you will read in many places is creativity tools. Creativity tools all come after you have information. If you don't have information, any tool is going to give garbage out. It is only when you have an ability to take variety of information that creativity increases. That variety of information will come only when you immerse in that situation. In my social video, I've also given you one thing on how a deaf musician, how she learned to be an expert in the percussion instruments. So one of our first activity given by her tutor was to take the drums and stay with it for 1 week. Now what did she do during that 1 week? She just started exploring the drum. She used to touch the drum at different places, tighten it in different ways, and feel the different sounds which come around that. And she cannot hear, she can only feel the sound. So she went on experimenting with the drum so much that she knows every part of the drum, what it can do, what sound it can give. That kind of deep appreciation started building about this. So what is a drum? Drum is essentially an infinite possibilities of sounds. So if I know this place of the drum, if I touch after it is tightened to this level, then it will give me this sound. That exploration is happening. Because of that, automatically the patterns that you see will start coming up. The same thing I told in the calendar example is the same thing. Because you are immersing in that numbers and repeatedly doing things, you are beginning to see new patterns in that. That pattern is what leads to new creativity. Next question is, marketing is very necessary for production. How to learn these marketing skills? See, marketing is again, marketing is necessary for production. It is not that way. Production is your operations, how you produce the product. Marketing is selling the product or relating to a customer, identifying a customer, understanding their requirement and positioning the product to their proper requirement. Now these skills have to be built up. Yes, MBA program, if you join, they can teach you some methods. But real marketing is fundamentally about how you really understand people. So sociology is very important for marketers. How do you understand people? How do you understand what they are going through? Putting yourself in the shoes of the customer. These are the things that you need to do. So ethnographic skills are extremely fundamental for building a good marketing skill. Which if you go to an MBA, they will not teach. In MBA, they will all talk about doing survey and all that kind of stuff. They will all give you only limited information. Technology is growing so rapidly. Today's new and successful idea may not be successful tomorrow. How to cover that gap? This keeps evolving. That's why the more you deeper you explore the space, the better. But you should always be open to the possibility that it will keep moving. That's why when you design a product, you pay a lot of attention to the product architecture. Product architecture should be designed in such a way that it can work with the different technologies. That defining that architecture is a very important aspect. Again, that is another thing which not many people pay attention to. Especially when you talk about smart product design or anything, people immediately think AI method. AI method comes very late. First thing is, what is your product architecture? And within that architecture, which method makes sense? These decisions need to be made. If you are building an architecture which is fairly flexible for different types of materials, different types of tools or techniques to work within that, then you have a product which can last longer. So suppose I'm building a car which is extremely constrained only on certain technologies, then I cannot adapt it. But if I build an architecture which allows me to accommodate different things, then it can live for a longer period. Next question, kindly suggest us and our students to whom we should contact for registration of a company. Today, registration of company has become pretty easy. There are quite a few agencies are available for you to do online registration. Online registration you yourself can do, but there are also, essentially the company registration happens on MCA. MCA is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So all the companies need to be registered in the MCA website, but there are a lot of company secretaries and certain online portals are also available today who can help you with the filing. All you need is basic information about the founder, yes, faculty can start companies. You can refer to the National Innovation Startup Policy on MHRD website. There are clear guidelines of what faculty can do, cannot do when they are starting a startup. So you can refer to that. NISP policy on the MHRD website is there. Institutions, all institutions are expected to adopt that policy in over a period of next 2-3 years. So faculty definitely can start companies, but there is clear boundaries in terms of what you will do as part of the company and what you will do as part of the institution. So those things you need to understand. In the registration is not a very difficult thing. It's say 4 to 6 weeks time period. You can register a company. Minimum 2 founders have to be there, and no major capital is required if you are doing an LLP type of registration. Less than 1 lakh investment, you can do a company registration. The fees typically will vary from 30 to 40,000 or so for if you go through some of these agencies, and it will require basic information about your personal details, and then the company, you have to write down some memorandum of understanding, articles of understanding, and those kind of few documents you'll have to prepare, and the business plan of the company. Those kind of things have to be prepared for registering.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your kind suggestion, sir.
Sure, welcome. So thank you all. Thanks for giving this opportunity to talk to all of you. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to me or this one. Also, we run this summer and winter sandbox program called Covidya. This next program starts on 12th December, where some of these real deeper understanding of context and other things, we introduce that to potential people who want to go into this journey.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks.
Sir,
Uttam.
I'm sure most of us learned many new things today. The session really changed my perspective on ideas, design, and innovation. On behalf of IIITM Kurnool, I would like to thank our guest, Dr. Sudhir Varadarajan sir, for inspiring and enlightening us. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Faculty community also, I would like to thank you very much, and student behalf and institute behalf, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Grateful to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. So I'll log off now. Thank you.